I didn't plan on dying rich. That part just happened. What I did plan, every inch of it, was how I'd leave. Not just the day, not just the way, but the message, the echo, the reckoning. I was 72, and the truth is, I had outlived my usefulness in their eyes. My daughter Julia called me when she needed help with the mortgage. My son Graham only visited when he wanted something notarized. My grandkids sent happy birthday texts with the wrong emoji. Nobody asked me how I was. Nobody really cared. And that's not self-pity. That's data. That's observation. I didn't get bitter overnight. I gave them decades, holidays, checks, a house, tuition, babysitting, late-night calls. Forgiveness I shouldn't have offered. And still, they treated me like wallpaper in the family story. There, but never the focus. Just something you lean against when the room gets cold. So one fall morning, sitting in my sunroom with a pot of Earl Grey and the last slice of almond cake I'd ever make for myself, I decided something. If they wouldn't hear me while I was alive, they'd have to listen when I was gone. I called my attorney that afternoon. His name was Daniel Hirsch. Quiet man, sharp as a tack. He tried to talk me out of what I asked for, of course, thought it was dramatic. I told him it wasn't drama. It was justice. I want to leave them each $1 million, I said, but only if they speak at my funeral. He started scribbling notes. Fair enough, he muttered. Not done yet, I added. They can only get the money if they answer a question, one question, from me, truthfully, and it must be recorded. He looked up, brow raised. What kind of question? I smiled. Something only they and I would understand, something that'll burn if they lie. That got his attention. We drafted everything, sealed it in the will, labelled it the Eleanor Whitmore Legacy Clause. It sounded dramatic in ink, but for me it was peace, my version of closure. See, people think death ends everything. It doesn't. If you do it right, it opens things. Locks fly off, secrets spill, words you never got to say become unavoidable. And me, I wasn't going to be buried quietly. They thought I was just the old woman in the chair by the window, but I was watching, I was waiting, and now I was in control. I wasn't the kind of mother who needed constant praise. I didn't ask for trophies, thank yous, or handwritten cards. I just wanted to be remembered, considered, seen. But somewhere between raising babies and being everyone's safety net, I became invisible. Julia, my eldest, used to grip my hand like it was her lifeline. Now she only called when something broke. The furnace, her marriage, her nerves. "You're so strong, Mom," she'd say when I offered to help, but strength to her meant I could handle being dismissed. Graham was worse. He always had a slick charm, the kind that makes people trust him right before he lets them down. To him, I was a resource, a vault, a witness he didn't have to answer to. The last time he hugged me without needing anything, Reagan was still president. And the grandchildren, well, they were raised to view me like a family antique, not valuable, but sentimental. Dusty, a little fragile, easy to forget. They loved my Christmas checks, not my stories. They didn't know the girl I was before the grey hair, the fire I carried long before motherhood tried to smother it. But I remembered her. I held on to her in the quiet. In the books I reread, in the jazz records I played when no one was around, in the mirror where my eyes still looked young, even as my body betrayed the years. So I decided, if I couldn't rewrite the past, I'd edit the ending. I didn't want a eulogy filled with lies. I didn't want a slideshow of smiles they barely remembered taking. I didn't want their grief, especially if it was born from guilt. What I wanted, what I demanded, was the truth. That's why I added the question clause. Each of them would have to speak, out loud, in front of everyone, answering one question from me, chosen specifically for them. They wouldn't know the question until the moment came, and they couldn't accept the inheritance unless they answered truthfully. No loopholes, no lawyers, just the raw, unfiltered truth. Daniel, my attorney, thought it was morbid. I thought it was poetic. They wanted my money. They'd have to confront the mirror I left behind. This wasn't revenge, it was revelation. Because if they never truly knew me while I lived, they'd have to reckon with me when I was gone. The funeral was exactly as I expected. Stiff clothes, forced tears, and more murmurs about the catering than about me. They dressed in black because it was required, not because they were in mourning. People cry harder at weddings. I watched it all unfold from a distance, thanks to the quiet arrangements I'd made with Daniel. A private videographer, hidden cameras, audio in every corner. Some would call it invasive. I called it insurance. They all showed up, of course. Word had gotten out fast. Not about my death, about the money. $1 million each, no split, no games. A clean, flat number that made even my most distant relatives suddenly remember my middle name. Daniel stood at the front of the chapel with his legal pad and measured voice. His suit was pressed, his tone detached. He had done this before, but this one had flavour. "I've been asked by the late Eleanor Whitmore to read a special clause," he began. The crowd leaned in. He cleared his throat. "In accordance with her wishes, the following terms apply. Each named beneficiary shall receive $1 million upon completing a singular, non-negotiable condition. The condition is this: each individual must stand before the assembled group and answer one question, chosen specifically for them by Ms. Whitmore, from beyond the grave. The question must be answered truthfully and in its entirety. There will be no second chances. There will be no appeals. Should the person refuse to answer, lie, or evade, their portion will be forfeited and donated to the organizations Ms. Whitmore selected." Gasps, a hand to the mouth. Julia's eyes darted toward Graham's. Daniel continued, "You may not know the question until it is asked. You may not prepare, rehearse, or seek counsel. This is her final request, and, as she phrased it herself, her last chance to be heard in a room that always talked over her." Silence followed, heavy, charged. Then the whispers began. "Is this legal? Is this a joke? What kind of sick game is this?" But no one walked out. Of course not. $1 million has a way of holding people in place, even if it means ripping their masks off. I had finally done it. I made them sit still. I made them listen. And now they had to answer. I didn't choose the number to be generous. I chose it to make them sweat. $1 million, not 50,000, not a little something to remember me by. No, I picked the kind of number that makes hands tremble and masks crack, the kind that brings out the worst in people trying to pretend they're at their best. I wanted their hands to shake when they heard it. I wanted their voices to catch when they realized the catch. I wanted them to stare down the single most valuable gift I ever offered and wonder if they were worthy of it. And the truth? They weren't. Not because they were monsters, not because they were cruel every day, but because they were casual with my love, and nothing burns quite like casual cruelty. Julia, my daughter, called me once every 2 weeks, like clockwork, but never once asked about the books I was reading, only about her kids' dental bills. She thought a "how are you" text was enough to erase months of silence. Graham, my son, came by only when he needed paperwork notarized or someone to co-sign. When I mentioned my bad hip or the fall I took in the garden, he'd mumble, "That sucks," then change the subject. His hugs felt like transactions. His love like a subscription that auto-renewed out of guilt. And my sister Lorraine, oh Lorraine, she hadn't called me anything kind since 1984. She used to say I was too much, too loud, too stubborn, too ambitious. She said those things like curses. I wore them like armor. They all wanted from me, but none of them ever thought to see me. So why give them the money at all? Because I wanted the truth. And truth only comes with stakes. You don't get it from polite conversations or holiday dinners with cranberry sauce and fake smiles. You get it when people have something to lose. You get it when a person is standing on a cliff and the only way across is honesty. That's why I chose $1 million. It wasn't a reward, it was a test. Would they finally speak to me like I mattered? Would they expose themselves, not to flatter me, but to face me? Or would they lie, play innocent, choke on the question they always dodged when I was alive? I was dead now, but I wasn't done. They'd never truly paid attention to me while I was living. So I made sure they had to pay attention now, with interest. Yes, really. I watched my own funeral. Not from heaven, not from some metaphorical beyond. I watched it from the upstairs loft of Whitmore Chapel, through a vent, behind a privacy screen, in a space that used to store choir robes and broken candlesticks. Dusty, cramped, perfect. Daniel made the arrangements. He wasn't thrilled, but he understood. I paid well, and lawyers don't ask too many questions when the retainer has commas. We had cameras installed too, of course, discreet, silent, positioned just right. But I wanted to see it live. I wanted to breathe in the awkward tension, feel the discomfort ripple through the room as my final game began. The first thing I noticed, they were dressed too well. Julia wore her pearls, the ones she only brought out for job interviews and court appearances. Graham had on cufflinks, expensive ones. My sister Lorraine wore black, but her lipstick screamed victory red. They looked like they were attending a charity gala, not burying the woman who raised, fed, and forgave them. People cried, but not the people who should have. The real tears came from my old neighbour Cheryl, who used to bring me peaches from her backyard in the summer. From the nurse who sat with me after my last dizzy spell. From the mailman who said I was the only one who remembered his name. Julia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue I guarantee was dry. Graham kept checking his watch. Lorraine sat stiffly, like she was attending a performance and waiting for the second act to start. And then came Daniel, with the clause. I knew that moment would be everything. When he read it aloud, the rule, the condition, the question, I saw it. The flash of panic, the shifting glances, the weight of the room dropped 20 degrees. A funeral is supposed to bring peace. Mine brought reckoning. Graham's jaw clenched. Julia whispered something to her husband. Lorraine scoffed audibly. That's when I smiled, because I saw something I hadn't seen in decades, their truth trying to crawl its way out. Some people attend funerals to mourn, some attend to reflect. But that room, they came to perform, and now the spotlight was turning. I sat back against the wooden beams, pulled the wool shawl tighter around my shoulders, and whispered to no one. Let's see who can lie to a dead woman and still sleep at night. Of course it was Julia, always first in line, first to speak, first to volunteer, first to claim the moral high ground, even when her feet were buried in mud. When Daniel called her name from the front of the chapel, she stood without hesitation. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks as she made her way to the podium. The air in the room shifted. People leaned forward, not because they wanted to hear her, but because they wanted to see her. See how she'd handle it. Daniel opened a small envelope marked with her name and read aloud the question I had written long before I took my last breath. Julia, when you told me, I'll always make time for you, Mom, why did you stop? It landed like a punch in the chest. Subtle, quiet, devastating. Julia froze. Not outwardly, no tears, no panic. But I saw it in the way she gripped the podium tighter. Her smile thinned. Her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the room, calculating. I never stopped loving my mother, she began. Not the question. I had 3 kids, a business, a mortgage, a husband who... She paused, giving herself the gift of a dramatic breath. It wasn't about time, it was about life getting hard. Still not the question. I did what I could. I called. I visited when I could. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but she knew I loved her. Lieutenant, I felt it like static on skin, because I remembered the nights I waited by the phone, the birthdays she forgot, the day I fell in the garden and couldn't reach her, so I lay there staring at the clouds, bleeding from my elbow, wondering if that was how it would end, not with tragedy, but with silence. Daniel didn't interrupt. That wasn't his job. His only role was to deliver the question, observe the answer, and then decide. When Julia finished, the room offered a polite murmur. She stepped away from the podium with that same politician smile she wore when she pitched PTA fundraisers and spoke at homeowners' meetings. But I saw it. She lied, not just in words, in intent. She answered around the question. She gave context, not confession, excuses, not truth. Daniel glanced up toward the hidden camera where he knew I'd be watching and gave the faintest nod. Confirmation. The clause was activated. Julia forfeited her $1 million. She didn't know it yet. She wouldn't find out until the reading of the full allocations. But when that moment came, when she learned that dodging the truth cost her more than just money, I hoped she'd remember what it felt like to speak over me one last time, because for once, I was the one who got the final word. Graham never liked standing still. Even as a boy, he fidgeted, his hands always in motion, twisting a pencil, flipping a coin, adjusting his collar. At my funeral, nothing had changed. He tugged at his cuff as Daniel read his name, his jaw tight, lips pursed like he was bracing for a blow. He walked to the podium slowly, shoulders hunched, as if the weight of what was coming had finally started to settle in. Daniel opened the envelope. Graham, why did you only call when you needed something? Simple. Director. Brutal. Graham didn't answer at first. He stared at the microphone like it had just insulted him. Then he laughed, a short broken sound. This is rich, he said. Pun intended. The room tensed. I know what everyone's thinking, that I'm some spoiled, greedy son who couldn't be bothered unless there was something in it for me. But you don't know what it's like to need help and have only one number to call. He paused. I didn't want to need her. I hated needing her. His voice cracked. That part I believed. I borrowed money because I was drowning, because I was ashamed, because my marriage was falling apart, my business failed, and I couldn't tell anyone else, not even my wife. But Mom, she'd just wire the money. No lecture, no questions, just silence. His hands gripped the edge of the podium. But she never asked why, never asked if I was okay. She just paid the bills and kept on living like that made her a good mother. And maybe she was. Maybe she really thought that was love. He looked up. His eyes were red. But I needed her to see me, and she never did. The crowd was quiet. Julia shifted in her seat. Lorraine folded her arms tighter. And then Graham cried. But I knew something no one else in that room did. He wasn't crying for me. He was crying for himself, for the years he wasted, the lies he told, the weight he carried. His tears weren't grief. They were regret, sour, selfish, overdue. He didn't answer the question. Not really. He gave pain. He gave context. But not truth. He didn't say, I only called when I needed something because it was easier than being honest. He didn't say, because I took her for granted. He bled, yes, but not for the right reasons. Daniel didn't blink, just made a small note in the ledger, another forfeit, another $1 million gone. As Graham walked back to his seat, wiping his face with a trembling hand, I wondered if he felt lighter or emptier. I hoped he finally heard himself, because I sure did. Lorraine stood slowly, regal, rehearsed, always the poised one, the one who wore her bitterness like pearls, polished and passed down. She didn't glance at anyone as she walked to the podium. Her heels echoed against the marble floor with the same rhythm she used to scold me in as children. Tap, tap, tap. judgment in every step. Daniel didn't even flinch. He opened the third envelope and read aloud, "Lorraine, why did you always try to shrink me?" The words hung in the air like smoke. She raised an eyebrow, not surprise, irritation. "Well," she began, smoothing her blouse, "Eleanor always did love theatrics." The audience braced. "I never tried to shrink her," she said. "She made everything about her, and I was always the one expected to clean up behind the curtain. I didn't get to be dramatic or wild or creative. I was the responsible one." She looked out into the crowd. "Do you know what it's like to live in someone's shadow who never even noticed they were casting it?" I smiled, because even in death, she still couldn't say it. She couldn't admit she resented me, not because I was reckless, but because I was free. When we were little, I sang too loudly in church. I laughed too hard at the dinner table. I painted my bedroom walls yellow. She called it obnoxious. She preferred beige, said it was calm, said I needed more calm. When I published my first essay in a local paper, she said I should have run it past her first. "You don't want to come off as desperate, Ellie." When I wore red to our mother's funeral, she pulled me aside and whispered, "Always too much, aren't you?" I was too passionate, too bold, too ambitious. And she hated it because it reminded her of everything she buried inside herself. And now, here she stood, in my final theatre, still trying to edit my script. "I didn't shrink her," Lorraine said again. "She just didn't know how to fit." That was it. Her truth, rewritten for comfort. Not confession, control. She stepped down from the podium like she'd won something, but Daniel made the note. Denied. Another million returned to the fire. Another soul too proud to speak plainly. They all thought the money was the point. But I was after something bigger. Exposure. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need applause, just a mirror. And Lorraine. She never looked in it. Not once. Her name was Emily. She was 23, I think. Graham's daughter. The quiet one. The one who didn't come to Christmas the last few years. The one who used to hide behind the couch at family reunions, earbuds in, eyes always down. I didn't know her well, not by choice, by design. Her parents kept her at a distance, said I was old-fashioned, said I asked too many personal questions, said she was busy. So I stopped asking. But now there she was, rising from the third row. No fuss, no theatrics, no pearls or posture games. Just a plain black dress, a messy bun, and eyes that looked like someone had finally slept in the truth too long. She took the podium and didn't wait for Daniel to open the envelope. "I don't need to hear the question," she said softly. "I already know what she wanted to ask me." Daniel hesitated, glanced at the crowd, then nodded. Emily looked out at the sea of uncomfortable relatives and let out the smallest breath. "She wanted to know why I never came to visit." The room froze. "I didn't come," she said, voice trembling but steady, "because I was ashamed." She gripped the sides of the podium. Ashamed that I didn't know her. Ashamed that when I heard she fell, I didn't pick up the phone. Ashamed that I didn't even know what her favourite song was. That I couldn't tell you if she liked red wine or white. That I was raised to believe she was just background. There was no defense, no self-preservation, just raw, brutal truth. "I came here today for the money," she added. "I'll admit that, but I'm staying because I think this is the only time I've ever actually heard her, really heard her." Silence thickened in the room. No coughing, no shifting. Even Lorraine stopped breathing for a moment. "I wish I had tried harder," Emily whispered. "I wish someone had told me she was more than a bank account and a casserole. I wish she was still here so I could ask her the questions." She wiped one tear away. Just one. "I'm sorry, Grandma. You deserved better from me, from all of us." Then she stepped away. No applause, just the hum of a moment too honest to follow. Daniel marked the ledger. Approved. Emily wouldn't just get the money, she'd get something more, something rarer. My forgiveness. She cracked the armor her parents couldn't, because she didn't wrap her confession in sugar. She gave me what no one else did, a truth with no exit strategy. And that was worth every dollar. I didn't expect it, not fully. I thought I'd built a perfect machine, a question, an answer, a judgment, clean, surgical. But the truth has a funny way of unraveling everything you think you've tied up, like a single loose thread that pulls an entire dress apart. Emily's confession cracked something in the room, not just the silence, the structure. After her, everything felt different. People started looking at one another like strangers. Julia stopped checking her phone. Graham's eyes stayed low, haunted. Lorraine began blinking too much. Something was shifting. The questions weren't just tests anymore, they were keys. And every answer unlocked a door they'd all nailed shut years ago. Emily's truth made me feel seen, but it also stirred something deeper, a memory, a room I hadn't entered in decades. You see, the whole time I planned this spectacle, the clauses, the cameras, the conditions, I told myself I was doing it for justice, but there was something underneath, something even I hadn't said aloud, a secret of my own. Daniel had the letter, sealed in a red envelope to be opened only after the final speaker. Inside, my truth waited. My question turned inward. My voice, not just as mother, sister, grandmother, but as Eleanor. Because I wasn't just testing them, I was testing myself. The real reason I set this plan in motion wasn't just because they forgot me, it was because I let them, because I stayed silent too long, because I gave when I should have demanded, because I made myself small in order to keep the peace. And somewhere along the way, I lost myself in their needs. I told myself I was strong, but really I was scared. Scared that if I asked for more, they'd walk away. Scared that my love only had value if it came with no strings. Scared that my voice didn't matter. So I waited until the only time they'd have to listen, when I was gone. And now, here they were, finally hearing me. But what they didn't know yet was that I had one more thing to say. One more revelation, one more story, one more truth. My secret wasn't scandal, it wasn't shame, it was pain, the kind that gets buried beneath baked casseroles and wire transfers and birthday checks no one cashes. But pain, when spoken, becomes power. And I was done being quiet. They weren't just standing in a funeral, they were standing in a confession booth I built from memory and gold. And I wasn't finished. Not until I asked the question that haunted me the most. There's a specific kind of silence that happens right before something explodes. It's not peace, it's pressure. The inhale before the collapse. That was the room, right before Daniel pressed play. He stood beside a small black speaker, wired into the chapel's sound system. The red envelope marked "Final Tape" rested on the podium like a sealed confession. Per Ms. Whitmore's instruction, he said evenly, this recording is to be played after 10 responses have been given, regardless of outcome. He pressed the button. A click, then static, then my voice. If you're hearing this, I'm dead. But don't get too comfortable. I'm not done talking yet. They froze, even Lorraine. You see, I spent most of my life being agreeable, quiet, useful. I made your birthdays special. I watched your kids. I paid your bills. And still, none of you really knew who I was. My voice wasn't angry. It was calm. That unnerved them more. So I left you questions. I wanted to know if, when pressed, you could be honest, not polished, not polite, just honest. I paused, not in the recording, in real life, watching from the shadowed loft. The air in the chapel grew thick. Even the florist who arranged the altar had paused in the back, holding her breath. But there's one truth I've never said out loud, not even to myself. Here it came. I wasn't a perfect mother. I let things go that I shouldn't have. I let people treat me like a footnote. I kept quiet so you could stay comfortable. Julia closed her eyes. Graham shifted in his seat. Emily looked down. And for that, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't demand better. From you. From me. The room cracked, ever so slightly. But this isn't just about me, this is about all of you, and how you live now, knowing what you chose to ignore. I took a breath in the recording, a long, hard one. You all came here thinking this was about money. It never was. A beat of silence. It was about memory, about legacy, about what survives after the casseroles are eaten and the flowers die. And then the voice softened. I loved you all, but love is not immunity. It doesn't shield you from consequence. It shines a light on it. Click. End of tape. They didn't move. No one spoke. Not Julia, not Graham, not Lorraine. The mask had been peeled back, the performance undone. There, in the aftershock, the truth finally bloomed. And for the first time since the service began, they all looked like they wanted to leave. Because I hadn't just left them questions. I'd left them nowhere to hide. It was bound to happen. I knew not everyone would play fair. When money's on the line, real money, masks don't just slip, they shatter. His name was Raymond, my nephew, Lorraine's son, a man with a designer suit and a politician's smile, the kind of person who called me Aunt Ellie every time election season came around, then disappeared the moment the results were in. He waited until the second week of the funeral clause hearings. After emotions had settled into a numb haze, and most of the family had either answered or cracked trying, he requested a private session with Daniel. I'd like to submit my response directly, he said smoothly, fingers steepled like a man used to being obeyed. For legal clarity. Daniel was skeptical. He'd seen that look before, the look of someone trying to bend a rule without breaking it. But Raymond was confident. Arrogance makes people sloppy. Daniel read him the question I'd written. Raymond, when you told me you admired me, what were you really after? Raymond didn't flinch. He handed Daniel a sealed envelope. Inside, a typed letter, professionally formatted and signed. It read like a campaign speech, polished, passionate, absolutely fake. He wrote that I was a role model, a guiding light, a woman who broke barriers. He used words like trailblazer and matriarch, as if Google had written the eulogy. There was no soul in it, just positioning. He thought style could outwit truth. He thought he could answer without answering. But what Raymond didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had anticipated this exact move. So I left Daniel one more instruction, sealed in a separate envelope marked "In case of manipulation." Inside was a simple document, a video transcript. It showed Raymond, 2 years earlier, drunk at a fundraiser laughing to a friend. My aunt, she's loaded and senile. I just keep showing up till she croaks. Then boom, payday. Daniel read that transcript aloud in the chapel, word for word. Every syllable like a hammer against the coffin lid. Gasps. A woman in the back dropped her purse. Lorraine turned white. Raymond stood frozen, his fake grin collapsing. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Per Ms. Whitmore's directive, Mr. Raymond Whitmore is disqualified. The inheritance will be redirected to the Women's Education Fund of Nashville. A single clap echoed from the back. Emily. And just like that, Raymond sat down, smaller, diminished, exposed. Because in this game, truth wasn't optional, and performance had consequences. He tried to cheat the condition, but the condition had teeth. And I made sure it bit. It was the second to last envelope, the one with the red wax seal, the one marked "to be read aloud." By Daniel only, after declarations have been made. They all thought the show was over, the judgments handed down, the money tallied, the clauses fulfilled. But I wasn't finished. I didn't want them walking away thinking I had only exposed their flaws. That this entire arrangement had been about superiority or revenge. No, that would have made me small. petty. Just another bitter woman shouting from the grave. Instead, I wanted them to know I had a secret too. A wound I never dared show while I was breathing, because some truths only make sense when you're gone. Daniel stood at the front of the chapel and broke the seal. He unfolded the letter with care, as if it might shatter. Then he read my voice aloud to the room. To those who survived me, if you're still here, listening, it means the fire I lit did not burn the house down, only the lies living inside it. I have one final truth to give, one that belongs only to me. A pause. When I was 23, I fell in love with a woman named Anna. She was fierce, sharp as broken glass. She read me poetry and poured whiskey like it was sacred, and I loved her, with everything I had. But in 1972, that kind of love didn't survive in daylight, not in Tennessee, not in our family. So I buried it. I married your father instead. I wore white. I smiled through every photograph. I said yes when I meant save me. Anna moved away, died alone, as far as I know. The room shifted, not in disgust, not in scandal, but in silence, the kind that follows a deep wound finally shown. I spent 50 years hiding the one version of myself that felt real, and no one ever asked, not once. So here is my final request. Stop assuming the people you love are who they present. Ask them, really ask them, who they've been, who they've lost, who they buried just to survive. Daniel's voice caught at the end. He cleared his throat. To love someone is to look past their mask. I wore mine until the very end, but not anymore. Now you know me, all of me. Goodbye. Eleanor. The room didn't breathe for 30 seconds. Julia had tears on her cheeks. Lorraine looked like stone. Graham bowed his head. Emily, bless her heart, smiled through her tears. They came for an inheritance. They found a whole human being. And I finally told the truth I was never brave enough to say out loud. Not in life, but in death, I came clean. After the tapes, after the confessions, after the silence, Daniel reached into his briefcase one last time and pulled out a plain white envelope. No wax seal, no embossed initials. Just my handwriting across the front. For Carla. The name sent ripples through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Carla wasn't family. She wasn't listed in the will. She wasn't even seated with the inner circle. She was the housekeeper, the one who came every Tuesday and Friday, rain or shine, the one who brought me almond scones from the bakery I liked, even when I never asked, the one who never judged me when I forgot names or cried while folding towels. Carla was present, quiet but consistent. And I noticed. The family looked confused. Julia furrowed her brow. Lorraine leaned to whisper something, but stopped when Daniel opened the letter and began to read. Dear Carla, I imagine you're shrinking in your chair right now, uncomfortable in the spotlight. Don't worry, I've made you the main character only briefly. You once told me you dreamed of opening your own cleaning business, one that treated workers with respect, with insurance, with time off to breathe. I remember you said it while dusting my bookshelf, your voice soft, like the dream might shatter if spoken too loud. I never forgot that. You saw me, Carla, not as an old woman, not as a task, not as a duty. You listened to my stories. You remembered my late-night jazz radio station. You noticed when I wore lipstick on hard days and asked no questions when I said I was fine, but clearly wasn't. So here's what I've left you. $100,000. No strings, no questions. Start your business. Build it with heart. Name it after someone you love. And know this, you mattered to me, deeply, quietly, more than most who carried my blood. Thank you for showing me kindness without condition. Eleanor Daniel folded the letter and placed it on the podium. Carla sat frozen in the last row, one hand over her mouth, the other trembling on her lap. She didn't stand. She didn't speak, just nodded slowly as if to say, I heard you too. The rest of the room didn't know where to look. Because sometimes the most devastating truth isn't betrayal. It's the quiet realization that a stranger knew someone better than you ever tried to. They all came expecting wealth, but I gave worth to the only person who never asked for it. And in that moment, Carla was the richest person in the room. Regret has a sound. It's not loud, it's quiet, a shifting of feet, a stifled breath, the creak of a wooden pew under the weight of too many unsaid things. After Carla's letter was read, the room began to fracture. Lorraine was the first to stand, not with defiance this time, but desperation. "She didn't know," she said, her voice sharp and thin. "She didn't know how much I held back because I thought it would make her stronger." Graham stood too. "She thought I used her," he said, eyes on the floor, "but I didn't know how to be weak in front of her. She never asked me to talk. She just paid." Julia followed, breathless. "I loved her," she whispered. "I swear to God I loved her. I just didn't know how to be what she needed. I didn't think she'd ever leave me out." They were all unraveling. Too late. Daniel looked at his watch. "As per the terms of the will," he said calmly, "you have until noon today to request a formal re-evaluation of your submission, and only if new verifiable evidence can be presented. At 12:01, the estate finalizes. All funds are permanently allocated." It was 11:34. 26 minutes left to rewrite their legacy. They moved like panicked ghosts. Julia fumbled through her purse, searching for printed call logs, photographs, letters. Graham pulled up bank transfers on his phone, trying to prove he'd once sent her flowers. Lorraine cornered Daniel, asking if emotional context could qualify as evidence. The irony? They were finally scrambling to be heard, just as time was running out. I watched it all unfold from above, in my shadowed loft seat, wrapped in a shawl and silence. They weren't asking for me back. They were asking for forgiveness without ever giving me truth. And forgiveness, like money, has terms. If they had just spoken honestly when they had the chance, if they had dropped their masks, even for 60 seconds, they'd be walking out of that chapel with something more than guilt and lost zeros. But now they were staring at clocks, begging a dead woman for grace after denying her dignity in life. At 11:57, Julia broke. She fell to her knees in front of the podium and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. Please, I'm sorry." I believe she meant it, but belief isn't proof. And love, when delivered too late, can't always be cashed in. At 12:01, Daniel closed the folder. The room froze, and the sound of regret grew louder. I wasn't cruel. I gave them all the same opportunity. Stand up, speak the truth, or sit down and stay small. They thought it was about money, but it was always about voice, about the one thing I never had enough of while I was alive, honesty. From the start, every word in my will had been crafted with purpose, not to punish, but to peel, to strip the polish, to make space for something real. I didn't care if their truths were ugly, I only cared that they were theirs. And that's what no one understood, not even Daniel, not at first. They could have stood at that podium and said, "I resented you. I didn't know how to love you. I failed you." And I would have left them everything, because truth when spoken bare is love, even when it hurts. Instead, they hid behind stories, excuses, polished sentences rehearsed in their heads while I lay in hospice alone. They thought I was asking them to confess. Number I was asking them to be seen. At the end of the service, Daniel read my final paragraph aloud, the words I wrote months before my final breath, with shaking hands and sharp intent. "To those who remained silent, you had a choice, to show me your heart or protect your pride. You chose the latter, and pride does not carry inheritance, it carries weight." I didn't want perfection, I wanted a moment of humanness, and yet they chose the silence they always gave me in life. But a few didn't. Emily, who stood tall and said what no one else could. Carla, who gave without expectation and received without asking. Even Daniel, who once called me eccentric, now stood a little straighter, like a man who understood too late that the loudest stories come from the quietest people. When the chapel emptied out, I imagined the ones who spoke truth walking out a little lighter, not because of the money, but because they saw themselves in the mirror I left behind. And the rest, they'd carry their secrets home, they'd say it was unfair, they'd twist my memory to fit their comfort. Let them. Because I gave them a choice, speak honestly or walk away with nothing but regret. It was just one sentence, 14 words, no insults, no accusations, no theatrics. But it landed like a hammer. Why did you only love me when I was useful to you? I asked it in different forms, tucked inside all the other envelopes. But this was the heart of it, the seed from which every clause and condition grew. A question so simple, so direct, that no one dared say it aloud in life. And when they heard it from the grave, it cracked them. Because how do you answer that? How do you look into the echo of a woman's absence and say, because it was easier that way? Because you made life convenient? Because you never asked me for anything in return? No one wants to admit that love, for them, was transactional. But that's what it became. You see, I was the glue, the emergency contact, the casserole during sickness, the babysitter, the check writer, the last-minute airport ride, the woman who never said no, and therefore was never truly seen. And slowly, I learned that being needed had become my identity. They didn't love me, they loved what I solved. So I asked the question, not to hurt them, to wake them, to ask them if they could even remember the last time they called just to hear my voice, not to borrow, not to complain, not to assign me a task, just to say hi. Most couldn't. The question burned. It followed them home, into their cars, into their dinner tables, into the hollow parts of their memory where they suddenly remembered all the things they never said. How are you? Do you need anything? I'm proud of you. You matter to me. It haunted them because it wasn't about me being dead. It was about realizing I had been dying in pieces for years, and they never noticed. The usefulness faded with my body. And when there were no more rides to give, no more checks to sign, no more birthdays to coordinate, what was left? Just a woman with questions, and a family with no answers. That's what made the question devastating. Not its weight, its truth. A mirror held up after the final act. A soft voice from the beyond, whispering, "Did you love me, or just the way I made you feel?" Some will spend their whole lives trying to answer that, and some will never try at all. This was the last real question I ever asked. I wrote it in pencil first. I didn't think I'd keep it. It felt too soft, too sentimental, too revealing. But in the end, it was the only one that mattered. Who loved me when no one was looking? Not when I cooked, not when I paid, not when I hosted, fixed, planned, patched, calmed. But in the quiet, in the mundane, in the moments no one clapped for and no one posted about. I wanted to know, was there a single person in this family who saw me, not as a machine, not as a martyr, but as a woman? A flawed, fragile, fierce woman who tried every single day to be more than her loneliness? I didn't need them to say, "I love you," while handing me a to-do list. I needed someone who stayed behind after the party and helped stack the chairs without being asked. Someone who noticed I hadn't been outside in 3 days and brought me sunflowers. Someone who remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding them. Who loved me in the small ways, the invisible ways? Carla did, with her quiet consistency, with her unspoken compassion. Emily did. Not during my life, but in the moment she stood up and named the silence we all pretended wasn't there. Daniel did in his own way. He honored every envelope, every clause, every boundary. He respected the rules not because they were legal, but because they were mine. The rest? They loved what I gave. They loved the structure I provided, the warmth I wrapped around their chaos. But when no one was watching, they vanished. I was alone in hospital beds, alone in waiting rooms, alone on Thanksgiving mornings before the doors opened. So I asked the question, not out loud, not in court, but in the will itself. To the ones who loved me when no one was looking, I saw you. And to them, I left not just money. I left presence, I left voice, I left legacy. Because when it comes to love, what matters isn't how loud you are when people are watching. It's how consistent you are when they aren't. And those who loved me in the quiet, they carry me forward. Not as a memory, as a lesson. No one expected him to stand. He had sat quietly through every speech, every accusation, every confession and consequence. No tears, no fidgeting, just stillness. Matthew Whitmore, my grandson, my son's son, the one who rarely spoke, who studied architecture and solitude in equal measure. The one everyone assumed was indifferent, simply because he didn't perform his feelings for the crowd. He rose slowly, deliberately, and walked to the podium. No envelope, no rehearsal, just truth wrapped in silence. He looked out over the sea of broken faces, of polished guilt and performative sorrow, and said, "I didn't come here for the money." Dead quiet. I came here to say, she was the only person who made me feel like I wasn't invisible. His voice didn't tremble. It didn't crack. It carved. When I was 13 and told my dad I wanted to paint instead of play football, he laughed. When I told my mum I was depressed, she told me not to be dramatic. But Grandma, she bought me my first canvas, and she never once asked me to smile. He looked down, hands pressed against the wood. She didn't just love us, she noticed us, and none of us noticed her back. A sob broke from somewhere in the back. Maybe Julia, maybe Lorraine, maybe all of them. I never said thank you. I never told her I loved her back. And now I don't want her money. I want her memory to mean something. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a tiny object, a gold pin. A single sunflower. She told me once that sunflowers always turn to face the light. I think she was the light, and we turned away. He placed the pin on the podium, gently, reverently. If any of you walk out of here still thinking this was about inheritance, you've already lost. Then he walked back to his seat. No applause, just silence, the kind that lives inside your chest for years. Even Daniel looked down, lips pressed tight. Even the stained glass windows seemed to shimmer differently, as if the whole room had heard something sacred. Matthew didn't cry, he didn't need to. He spoke what I had hoped someone, anyone, would say. Not because it redeemed the rest, but because it broke the spell. Truth, when spoken clearly, doesn't need volume. It needs courage. And that boy, that quiet boy I once watched paint a bird onto my back porch wall. He broke the room, not with anger, but with love, the kind that finally arrived, even if it was late. They thought it was about the will. They dressed in black, printed old photographs, booked hotels, and stood stiffly in the front row like actors waiting for curtain call, expecting drama but hoping for reward. They got both. But they missed the lesson until the end. That's why I left one final message, a short one, pre-recorded, played after the last speaker, after Matthew shattered whatever illusions were still clinging to the air. The room was silent when Daniel pressed the button. My voice came through one last time, not soft, not angry, just true. If you're still here, I'll keep it brief. I know you thought this was about the money, the million-dollar clauses, the questions, the test, but it never was. The money was a mirror. It showed you who you are and who you chose to be when I wasn't around to watch. I paused. Let that land. I had to die before some of you finally saw me, and that's not tragic. That's common. People don't change because of inheritance. They change because they've been seen, or because they finally choose to see. The room held its breath. Even the chapel seemed to lean in. This wasn't about punishment. It was about reckoning. You want to honor me? Then start asking real questions. Listen without waiting to reply. Say, I love you, even when you're uncomfortable. Love loudly, and don't wait until someone's gone to do it. A soft piano played beneath the final words, a song I used to hum while doing dishes. No one had noticed it before. I leave you with this. Money fades, stories fade, but memory, that's what you build or destroy every day. I didn't die to make you rich. I died hoping you'd finally understand that the only thing worth inheriting is truth. The audio clicked off. No applause, no tears right away, just stillness. A kind of holy stillness, the kind that comes when something ancient has been broken, and in its place, something honest is born. They came for a fortune, but what they got was a funeral they'd never forget. And in that, I finally became impossible to ignore.